Imagine it's a Tuesday morning in December 2024. You're sitting in a cafe on the left bank in Paris, the kind with tiny round tables that wobble when you set down your espresso. Outside, a steady drizzle is falling on the cobblestones. Tourists are snapping photos of Notre Dame across the river, its scaffolding finally coming down after 5 years of restoration. The croissant in front of you is perfect, buttery layers that shatter when you bite into them. The waiter brings your bill, €3.50 for the coffee. You pay with a card and watch him tap the terminal with the weary efficiency of someone who's done this 10,000 times. Everything feels normal. Civilized. This is France, after all. The country that invented the café, the croissant, the concept of joie de vivre itself. You lean back in your chair, light rain tapping against the window, and you think to yourself, this is what a rich country looks like. You're wrong, dead wrong. Because while you're sipping that espresso a few kilometers away in the Assemblée Nationale, the French Parliament, something is breaking. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just quietly, relentlessly, like a bridge with too many cracks finally giving way under its own weight. France is going broke. Not someday, not in some distant theoretical future, right now. And the truly terrifying part? Almost nobody seems capable of stopping it. Cut to 2025. The café is still there, the croissants are still good, but France just recorded the largest budget deficit in the entire eurozone. The government is spending 60 billion euros a year just paying interest on debt it already owes. That's the same amount France spends on its entire military. The country has cycled through 6 prime ministers in 2 years because nobody can agree on how to fix the problem without triggering riots in the streets. Bond markets are charging France an extra 80 basis points compared to Germany just to borrow money. A premium that ripples through every mortgage, every business loan, every corner of the economy. This isn't a recession. Recessions end. This is something far more insidious. This is a country that built one of the most generous social safety nets in human history, a system so comprehensive that it became the envy of the developed world, and then discovered too late that it can no longer afford to pay for it. France is trapped. It can't raise taxes because they're already the highest in the OECD. It can't cut spending because voters will burn Paris to the ground. It can't grow its way out because the economy is structurally stagnant. And it can't print money because it uses the euro. So, what happens when an advanced democracy realizes it's living beyond its means but lacks the political will to do anything about it? What happens when the bill comes due and nobody wants to pay? Welcome to the French debt crisis. This is the story of how a country bankrupts itself in slow motion while the world watches. And trust me, this isn't just France's problem. This is a warning. 1. The debt trap, or how France became Europe's subprime borrower. To put that in perspective, the European Union has something called the Maastricht criteria, a set of rules that are supposed to keep member states fiscally responsible. One of those rules says your debt should not exceed 60% of GDP. France hasn't seen 60% since the 1,990 seconds, back when people were still figuring out how to use email. Here's an even more stunning fact. France has not passed a balanced budget since 1974, not once in the last 50 years. Doesn't matter who was in charge. Socialists, conservatives, centrists, it's all the same. Every single government, left or right, has spent more money than it collected for half a century. That's not a policy choice. That's an addiction. Where does all that borrowed money go? It's not going into shiny new infrastructure. French bridges are crumbling. It's not going into the military, which is chronically underfunded. It's going into one place: social protection. France spends between 32% and 34% of its GDP on social programs. Pensions, healthcare, unemployment benefits, family allowances, housing subsidies, you name it. That is the highest in the developed world. Higher than Sweden, higher than Denmark. France is running a Scandinavian-level welfare state on a southern European economy. And here's the kicker. That social spending isn't shrinking, it's growing. Because France's population is aging rapidly, the baby boomers are retiring en masse. And when they retire, they expect pensions that often exceed what they were earning when they were working. In France, it's not uncommon for retirees to collect €3,000 a month or more from the state pension system. That's higher than the median wage for people still working. Let that sink in. You can retire and make more money than the average person grinding through a 40-hour work week. Now, generous pensions are lovely if you can afford them. But here's the problem. France's pension system is pay-as-you-go. That means the money taken out of your paycheck today isn't being saved for your future retirement. It's being wired directly to someone who's already retired. You're paying for grandma's vacation in Nice right now. This system works great when you have 4 workers for every retiree. That was France in the 1,960 seconds. Today, it's 1.7 workers per retiree, and that ratio is getting worse every year. So, you have a shrinking pool of workers trying to support a growing army of retirees who are living longer than ever. The math doesn't work. The system is bleeding billions of euros annually. And every year, the government has to borrow more money just to plug the hole. This brings us to the 60 billion euro problem. That's how much France paid in 2024 just in interest on its existing debt. Not paying down the debt, just servicing it. 60 billion euros vanishing into the void, money that could have built hospitals or schools or literally anything productive. And it's going to get worse. Projections suggest that by 2030, France will be spending 100 billion euros a year on interest payments alone. That's more than the entire education budget. Think about that for a second. France will soon be spending more money on mistakes it made in the past than it spends educating the children who are supposed to fix the future. If that doesn't scream debt trap, I don't know what does. 2. The pension bomb, or why asking people to work until 64, almost started a revolution. Riot police firing tear gas into crowds, fires burning in the boulevards. It looked like a war zone. What heinous policy could possibly provoke this level of rage? The government proposed raising the retirement age from 62 to 64. 2 years. That's it. Not abolishing pensions, not cutting benefits, just asking people to work 2 more years before collecting their checks. And France nearly tore itself apart. To the rest of the world, this looked insane. In Germany, the retirement age is 67 and heading higher. In the UK and US, it's similar. But in France, suggesting that people work until 64 was treated like a human rights violation. Why? Because pensions in France aren't just an economic program. They're a sacred covenant. They're part of the national identity. Here's what protesters didn't want to admit. The pension system is a Ponzi scheme. It only works if you have a constantly growing population of young workers paying into it. France doesn't have that. The birth rate, while higher than Italy or Spain, is still below replacement level. The population is aging. The ratio of workers to retirees is collapsing. And there is no pile of money sitting in a vault somewhere. It's all pay as you go. So, when the government tried to make a tiny rational adjustment to keep the system solvent for another decade, the response was fury. Emmanuel Macron, the president, pushed the reform through using a constitutional mechanism that bypassed a parliamentary vote. It was legal, but it was also politically toxic. His approval ratings collapsed. Prime ministers resigned. The government nearly fell. And for what? 2 extra years of work. This is the core of France's problem. The public wants Scandinavian-level benefits, but refuses to accept Scandinavian-level sacrifices. They want generous pensions, but don't want to work longer or accept lower payouts. They want world-class health care, but don't want to pay higher taxes. And politicians, terrified of losing elections, keep promising things the country can't afford. Right now, pension spending accounts for roughly 60% of France's total social spending. That's money going almost entirely to the oldest people in the country, the demographic that votes most reliably and punishes politicians most brutally if benefits are cut. Meanwhile, young workers, who are being taxed into oblivion to pay for this system, know they'll probably never see a decent pension themselves. It's intergenerational robbery, and it's making the working population poorer every single day. 3. The political carousel, or why France can't keep a prime minister for more than 6 months. But France also has a prime minister who runs the day-to-day government and answers to Parliament. And here's where things get messy. Since 2024, France has burned through 6 prime ministers. Let me list them for you. Edouard Philippe, Elisabeth Borne, Gabriel Attal, Michel Barnier, François Bayrou, Sébastien Lecornu. And Lecornu technically resigned and was then reappointed, so depending on how you count, we might be at 7. It's honestly hard to keep track at this point. Why the revolving door? Because France is stuck in political gridlock. The 2024 snap elections fragmented Parliament into three blocks: the center, the far right, and the far left, none of which can command a majority. Every budget proposal becomes a death match. Every reform triggers a no-confidence vote. Prime ministers come in with ambitious plans to fix the deficit, realize they can't pass anything without triggering a government collapse, and then either resign or get voted out. This creates a vicious cycle. France desperately needs structural reforms. It needs to raise the retirement age further. It needs to cut public sector jobs. It needs to simplify its insane tax code. But every attempt to do any of this runs into a wall of political resistance. And because everyone knows there's a presidential election in 2027, nobody wants to be the one pushing through painful measures that will make them deeply unpopular. So instead, everyone is posturing. The far-right National Rally, led by Marine Le Pen, is positioning itself as the champion of ordinary French people being squeezed by elites. The far-left France Unbowed is calling for wealth taxes and nationalization. The center is trying to hold together a collapsing coalition, while bond markets start to panic. It's a mess. And here's the truly frightening part. Polls suggest that Marine Le Pen has a real shot at winning the presidency in 2027. If that happens, if France elects a far-right government that wants to massively increase spending while also potentially clashing with the EU, the bond markets are going to lose their minds. The spread between French and German borrowing costs will explode. France could face a full-blown sovereign debt crisis. We're talking Greece 2010 levels of chaos, but in the second-largest economy in the eurozone. The political paralysis means that every day France doesn't fix its fiscal problems, the hole gets deeper, the debt grows, the interest payments increase, the options narrow. It's like watching someone standing on train tracks arguing about which direction to run while the train gets closer. 4. The deficit death spiral, or how France became the eurozone's problem child. It has a deficit problem. And the deficit is getting worse, not better. In 2024, France recorded the largest budget deficit in the entire eurozone. The government is spending far more than it's taking in, and the gap keeps widening. Why? Because France has boxed itself into an impossible corner. On one side, you have mandatory spending that's politically untouchable: pensions, healthcare, education, public sector salaries. These things make up the vast majority of the budget, and cutting them triggers riots. On the other side, you have tax revenues that can't keep growing because France already has the highest tax burden in the OECD. The government is already confiscating between 45% and 48% of the entire country's GDP in taxes and social charges. There's no room to squeeze more. So what happens? The government tries to close the gap with small measures, a tweak here, a fee there. Maybe they propose cutting some subsidies for farmers or raising taxes on energy companies. And immediately, the affected group takes to the streets. Farmers block highways with tractors, workers go on strike. The government backs down. The deficit stays wide. This is what economists call a doom loop. The deficit forces the government to borrow more. The borrowing increases the debt. The debt increases interest payments. The interest payments widen the deficit. Round and round it goes, each cycle making the problem worse. And here's the truly insidious part. Because about 60% of French debt is held by foreign investors, France is especially vulnerable to shifts in market sentiment. If bond investors start to lose confidence, they sell French bonds. When they sell, yields go up. When yields go up, France has to pay more to borrow. And when France pays more to borrow, the deficit gets even wider. You can already see this happening in the French-German spread. Right now, Germany, the Eurozone's benchmark for safe borrowing, pays about 2.7% on its 10-year bonds. France pays about 3.5%. That 0.8 percentage point difference, 80 basis points, is the market's way of saying, we trust Germany more than we trust you. And that spread has real consequences. It doesn't just affect the government, it ripples through the entire economy. Mortgages get more expensive. Business loans cost more. Investment slows down. The whole country pays a premium because of political instability and fiscal irresponsibility. And the worst part? The spread could get much worse. If markets really start to panic, if investors decide that France is on a path to default or a bailout, that 80 basis points could turn into 200 or 300. At that point, France would be facing a full-blown crisis. 5. The tax trap, or why half your paycheck disappears before you even see it. First, employer contributions to the state. Your gross salary drops to 43,000 euros. Then employee contributions. Your net salary is now 33,000 euros. Then income tax. You take home maybe 28,000 to 30,000 euros. Half of your labor value confiscated before you buy groceries. And what do you get? Free healthcare with 20-hour emergency room waits. Free education with sliding international rankings. Infrastructure full of potholes. The social contract is breaking. The government takes half your income, but services are deteriorating because the money goes to pensions and interest payments. This creates brain drain. If you're young and talented, why stay? Move to London or Zurich and double your take-home pay. Between 2.5 and 3 million French citizens now live abroad. Engineers, doctors, entrepreneurs, scientists. France educated them. Now they're building companies in Silicon Valley, and France gets nothing. The country is hollowing out. The smartest people leave. The tax base shrinks. The government raises taxes on whoever's left. More people leave. It's strangling the economy. 6. The reform paralysis, or why every attempt to fix this ends in flames. Because every attempt ends the same way. Protests, strikes, riots, government collapse. France has a culture of resistance baked into its DNA. This is the country that beheaded its king, where students in 1968 nearly toppled the government, where taxi drivers burn cars over Uber. When the French are angry, they shut down the country. And it works. Governments propose reforms, unions strike. The government backs down, every time. This creates paralysis. Everyone knows pensions are unsustainable, but touching them is political suicide. Everyone knows the public sector is bloated, but cutting jobs triggers strikes. Everyone knows taxes are too high, but lowering them means cutting services. So nothing happens. Prime ministers come and go. Budgets get proposed and rejected. The debt keeps growing. And Europe is watching nervously. France isn't Greece. France is the second largest eurozone economy with nuclear weapons. If France collapses, if it needs a bailout, there's no rescue fund big enough. Germany couldn't do it alone. The ECB would have to print trillions. It would make 2010 look like a warm-up act. 7. The 2027 question. Or, can Notre Dame save France? So is France doomed? Is it destined to spiral into default, trigger a eurozone crisis, and take half of Europe down with it? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on what happens in 2027. That's when France holds its next presidential election, and that election is shaping up to be the most consequential in modern French history. Because whoever wins will inherit a country on the brink. The debt will be even higher, the deficit will be wider, the political gridlock will be worse, and the bond markets will be watching like hawks. If Marine Le Pen wins, as polls currently suggest she might, France could be heading for a confrontation with the EU. Le Pen's party wants to massively increase spending, especially on pensions and welfare. They want to protect French industry with subsidies and tariffs. They're skeptical of EU budget rules. If they come to power and start implementing these policies, the bond markets will panic. Yields will spike. The spread with Germany will explode. France could face a crisis that forces the ECB to intervene, and at that point, all bets are off. If the center holds, if Macron's coalition or someone like it wins, France might have a chance. But only if they can muster the political will to push through painful reforms. And there's no guarantee they can. The 2023 pension reform nearly brought down the government. Imagine trying to do something even more ambitious. There is one glimmer of hope, though: Notre Dame. In 2019, the cathedral caught fire and nearly burned to the ground. Macron promised it would be rebuilt in 5 years. And against all odds, it was. The restoration was completed on time, a rare example of France actually delivering on a promise. The Notre Dame restoration succeeded for a few reasons. First, Macron set a hard deadline and stuck to it. Second, French society, from billionaires to ordinary citizens, came together to fund it. Third, the project was allowed to cut through red tape and think creatively. Not every building regulation was followed to the letter. They focused on results, not process. Could that model work for the fiscal crisis? Could France rally around a shared national project, set a hard deadline, and make the tough decisions needed to fix the budget? It's possible. France has come back from worse. This is a country that survived the 100 Years' War, the Revolution, 2 World Wars, and Nazi occupation. There's a resilience in the French character that shouldn't be underestimated. But the clock is ticking. The debt is real. The demographics are unforgiving. The political paralysis is deepening. France is living on borrowed time and borrowed money. The question isn't whether a correction is coming. The question is when, and how painful it will be. Final thoughts. The canary in the European coal mine. These solutions work economically. Politically, they're radioactive. No politician wants to tell voters they need to work longer, earn less, accept fewer benefits. Especially when the far right promises the opposite. So France will likely keep kicking the can until it runs out of road. And when bond markets lose patience, when the spread hits 200 basis points and the ECB must intervene, it won't just be France's problem. It will be Europe's problem. The eurozone wasn't built to handle a crisis in its second largest economy. France is the canary in the European coal mine. See what happens when a democracy promises more than it can deliver. See what happens when short-term politics trump long-term responsibility. If you made it this far, if you understand why those perfect croissants come with economic terror, hit that like button. Drop a comment. Can France turn this around, or are we watching the beginning of the end? If you're French, are you staying or packing for London? Thanks for watching. See you in the next